papa siga for to tell me yes mini view. Now so plenty they envy you. Because I'm in my blog about mini view. You're windy, guess in the Jimmy Dew. I'm all in preview, nothing I get. Now mini shoe, nothing I get. I'm all in preview, nothing I get. Now mini shoe, nothing I get. I'm all in preview, nothing I get. Now mini shoe, nothing I get. I'm all in preview, nothing I get. Now mini shoe, nothing I get. Nothing I get. You know nothing I get. You nothing I get. Nothing I get. Maybe I might have bed. My bed there. Say nothing I get to. Very soon my money go come music a bepe. But if you come to be as a better. This a be to grow my shit. To be now again, this is what I meant. Better again, I'm a do it. Man, I shall wait. Medina cool. I'm already in preview, nothing I get. Now mini shoe, nothing I get. I'm already in preview, nothing I get. Now mini shoe, nothing I get. I'm already in preview, nothing I get. Now mini shoe, nothing I get. I'm already in preview, nothing I get. Now mini shoe, nothing I get. You don't know me, but I'm here. I thought you said I wanna be a billionaire. Some if you an engineer, and let me person me fake I want to be rare. See, I'm a brother man. Sometimes me resist me a dada, but I want to be myself, not another man. Nipa who me don't just call my caliber. Me say me get to. Would you know me no you fit to? Uma when you be me away bombo. Me want me zongo. Am I winning preview? Nothing I get. Now mini shoe. Nothing I get. Am I winning preview? Nothing I get. Now mini shoe. Nothing I get. Am I winning preview? Nothing I get. Now mini shoe. Nothing I get. Am I winning preview? Nothing I get. Now mini shoe. Nothing I get. Remain here to say me. Sorry I'm not fine today to say me. Me yeah I used to be as a shame me. Oh here ni papa siga for to tell me yes mini view. Now so plenty they envy you. Because I'm in my blog about mini view. You're windy, guess in the Jimmy Dew. I'm all in preview, nothing I get. Now mini shoe, nothing I get. I'm all in preview, nothing I get. Now mini shoe, nothing I get. I'm all in preview, nothing I get. Now mini shoe.
It's DJ Sark. That's fine.
Sister again, can't just Muda, would you Muda? Family, didn't take out Natus, water time, can't just my what do you do? Sister again, can't just Muda, would you Muda? Family, didn't take out Natus.
Oh boy, baby, you just give me back.
My G cool down, don't stop. Time they cool down, don't stop. Plenty enemies don't talk. Silence money, don't shout. Very soon you go pop champagne and bad no. My chillama, I want him yo. Very soon you go pop champagne and bad no. My chillama, I want him yo. Heaven, I wanna ride it. Heaven, I wanna ride now. Heaven, I wanna ride it. I want to go. Heaven, I wanna ride it. Heaven, I wanna ride it. Heaven, I wanna ride it. Matiama Frefie, Seni Besibia and Sati, near Chibia and Sati, Tatias in Quadi, Gideonsa, Tante, the Baronsa. I pass on me, them. The fire still burning. So over just your bed. Right soon you go pop champagne, bad Machiliama, I want you. Right soon you go pop champagne, bad Machiliama, I want you. Heaven, I'm the one right here. Heaven, I'm the one right now. Heaven, I'm the one right here. I want you. Heaven, I'm the one right here. Heaven, I'm the one right now. Heaven, I'm the one right here. I want you. Mrebesi so, mrebesi sa. Many if you friend ya betoka. Nipa kasache, nyame bekasa. Nipa kasache, nyame bekasa. I don't know, baby. I don't know, baby. Take your time, now, baby. Yeah, giddy.
Hello. Oh, hello. Good evening. Good evening to everyone. I was trying my best to ensure that I don't have to come and apologize to you, but sometimes it's beyond our control. So we apologize greatly or immensely for the late start of the program. Let's put our hands together for ourselves. Thank you very, very much for your patience. We really appreciate you. At this juncture, I'd want us to please be on our feet even as we invite our chaplain to please come and give us the opening prayer. So, Reverend Anthony Ani, please, let's put our hands together and welcome him.
Please let us pray. We give you all the glory, we give you all the praise, we give you all adoration for this wonderful time, for this education forum, oh Lord, that have been put together by the old boys, for us to look at how we will shape education for the future, listening to the students, getting insight from staff members and teachers, and also getting the experience from old boys. We pray in the name of Jesus that your divine presence will be with us throughout this program, O Lord. Help us to have the right understanding of education and how it should be, so that the future which is here will be put in the right way to help us, O Lord, move forward for your glory in Jesus' name. Any plan of the enemy concerning us, we overrule, we cancel and nullify. Take your rightful place in our midst, that at the end of it all, we'll have very important things coming out of it to shape our own lives as individuals and dedication in our nation for your own glory. We say thank you, Father, thank you, Son, thank you, Holy Spirit, that you will help us to be nurtured and take our places in the future of the country and the church. Glory be unto your name for the answered prayer through Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen. Thank you and God bless.
Let's put our hands together. Thank you very much. And since we are guests here tonight, it's just right that we invite the landlord or the landlady of the house to come and officially or formally welcome us. So we are honored this evening to have in our midst our own mother, Mrs. Mercy Amwa, our assistant headmistress. So please, let's welcome her. Oh, put your hands together. Put your hands together. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, but I just want to say that I am here in place of our CEO, who is our headmaster, Mr. David Ojija. And so on behalf of the Board of Governors of the school, on behalf of our Chief Executive Officer, Mr. David Odija, on behalf of management, staff, and students, 1996 year group, we are proud to have you back in our midst. I think this is a maiden edition of Education Forum, and we are proud to say that 96, you are championing that. This year, on the 1st of February, our grade school turned 87. And the theme we had celebrating the year was celebrating our heritage, shaping the future. And I think it is important to know that as we journey through our lives, there are times when we have to stop, reflect, and ponder. How were things back then? When you were in school, I think things were different. Now, how is it? And in the future, how is it going to be like? And so I think this forum is meat. It's expedient for us to also consider ways of improving how things have been. And so we want to warmly welcome you, 1996 year group, and to also say that you are home. So feel at home and do what you do best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Samoa. Oh, let's put our hands together for her. I think she's actually done my job for me. And so I won't waste too much time. But before we proceed, we have members of 96 here. Please humbly ask that you be on your feet. Let's wave to the crowd. And let's also acknowledge the presence, 96. Yeah. Thank you very much for taking time off your busy schedules to be here with us. As Mrs. Amoa said, this is our maiden education forum, and the theme is shaping the future of education, student voices, teacher insights, alumni experiences. So we're going to be having a conversation tonight about how we can enhance what we're doing in our education here in Presec. And once we get it right here, we are the best. Do we agree that we are the best? Yeah. So definitely the other schools will be copying from us, and so we're going to get it right. So we have two distinguished speakers who are going to be making some presentations to us. When they are done, we will have a panel discussion where we're going to have two of the students, two of our faculty or our teachers, together with our guest speakers, to also engage furthermore and bring some more clarity to the presentations. And then after that, we'll open the floor so that if you also have a contribution or a question, you'll be given the opportunity to also share with us what your inputs are. Is Guase still alive? All right. So we would see how many of you would be giving, just 200 cedis. How many days will 200 last you at Guase? What did you say? 1 day. You eat 200 cedis a day. Do you work? No, honestly, how many days will 200 last? 2 days. 2 weeks. 2 days. But those of us who work, who make money, who earn money, we eat gobe 20 cedis a day. So how come you will eat 200 cedis in 2 days? It means you don't go to the dining hall. You don't go to the dining hall. Group eating. Anyway, it's good to have you here. Thank you once again. So let's get the show on the road. Help me welcome our organizing secretary in the person of Dr. Ernest Goka to introduce our first speaker. Please, let's put our hands together for Dr. Ernest Goka.
Grammarians and English scholars have always found a challenge trying to distinguish between two words, finished and complete. Some argue they are not the same, whilst others say they are. This is my little way of making you know that there are differences amongst the two words, finish and complete. If you marry the right woman, you are complete. If you marry the wrong woman, you are finished. If you marry the woman who prefers to shop for vegetables and groceries at the mall instead of the traditional market, you are finished completely. And if your wife catches you in bed with another woman, you are completely finished. That said, we are here to do the education forum, and our theme, shaping the future of our education. We want to see the fine lines between what is present, what can be done, and how it can be done. With the time spent, I'm just going to introduce the people who are just going to help us do this. And quickly, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and just so you know, he's the president of the Impedigree, a social enterprise working on 3 continents in partnership with governments, Fortune 500 companies, and grassroots organizations to spread innovations, including patent-pending technologies that secure communities for supply chain fraud. At Cold Chain, he led pioneering work at the Harvard Innovation Labs, invent and patent organosensors for biomedicals. At Imani, he led the organization's research practice for more than a decade, contributing to its global profile through multiple appearances in the international press. Imani is routinely ranked in the top 5 think tanks in Africa for innovation and impact. Besides his own primary work, he is an enthusiastic advisor of other organizations. He served on the supervisory board of CARE International, on the sustainability board of UCB, a European biopharma pioneer, the board of directors of the Salzburg Global Seminar, and is the vice chair of the African Population Health Research Center. He previously served on the inaugural Microsoft Africa Advisory Council and the Africa Strategy Group of the World Economic Forum. The latter organization also nominated him as a young global leader and a member of its Global Agenda Council. He's a Tolbeck Prize laureate, TED Fellow, and Aspen Braddock Scholar. In 2016, Fortune magazine named him on its list of 50 world's greatest leaders. He has a passion for youth mentorship through initiatives such as We Are Family Foundation's 3 Dots program. With all I said, let's please give an applause as I welcome Bright Simmons. Thank you. You can do it better. Let's give it another one, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Goka. I mean, that's a very tough act to follow. The philosophy is way beyond my pay grade. So I'm not going to attempt any philosophy. I'm just going to go straight to the topic I was given to talk about the future of education, obviously in Africa and Ghana, but perhaps also the world. But before I do that, I want to thank the 96-year group for inviting me. I'm very grateful for the honor, and to thank PRESEC for allowing its facilities to be used for this inaugural education forum. Hopefully, my slides come back up. Well, as they work on the slides, I just want to check that everyone can hear me well, including at the back. Are you hearing me well? Wonderful, wonderful. Good. Talking about the future is always a high-risk enterprise. The truth, though, is that the future is already here. And I think the Reverend Chaplain made that really insightful point about the future being over here. There is actually a famous author called William Gibson who said that the future is already here, but it's unevenly distributed. So essentially, we are already living in the future, but in bits and pieces. And some of us are much more ahead than others as far as this futuristic lifestyle is concerned. The question that I'm sure is on your minds is, who is this guy in front of you and why is he going to talk to us about the future of education? We've got our own faculty and they are in the business of education. So why is some foreigner, in inverted commas, standing before us to talk about the future of education? So I just wanted to give you a few highlights of why, in my own modest way, I might have some insights to share with you about how education is probably going to shape up in the coming decades. The first thing that I've done that is relevant to this topic is that I sit on the advisory board of a university in Ghana called Ashasi. And Julius knows what I'm talking about very well because he's friends with my president, Patrick Ewua. And Ashasi is one of the more innovative universities in Ghana. They are trying to change the way that education works. The second reason why you may want to listen to some of the few things that I have to say is because I'm also on the African Reference Group for Cambridge University, which is a university in the United Kingdom, very well noted for its work in STEM, science, technology, entrepreneurship, and mathematics. And my view of the matter is, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Sorry for that. And therefore, because of the work that we do at the African Reference Group, our aim is to encourage the university to do much better in reaching out beyond its own immediate ecosystem to commercialize the research that it undertakes. And much of that work is currently ongoing in 3 countries in Africa, of which Ghana is one. So there's Ghana, Uganda, and South Africa. And by sitting on this reference group, I get an insight into how universities, that's obviously the apex of the higher education system, are thinking about the future of education. The last relevant experience is the SAICI organization, which is part of the Center for Public Leadership at Harvard, where I am a visiting social fellow. And what I do there is to try and encourage the embedding of entrepreneurship into the Harvard curricula. So these are people that are in Harvard to get an education, they want to get a degree, but they also want to run a business alongside getting their degree. And our job is to provide mentorship for these kinds of students. And they rank from, undergraduate all the way through students, postgraduate students in the different schools in Harvard. I think there are 11 postgraduate institutions, and we provide that mentorship for them. So I will say that I know a little bit about what universities are trying to, do in response to these volatile times we live in, these dramatic times we live in, when technology is intersecting with geopolitics, etc., and having an impact on the kind of education that people get and what they put that technology to. Okay, we can't talk about the future of education, though, unless we survey the present. So I'm not going to go into great depth trying to describe the current situation of education in Ghana, but I thought it would be necessary to discuss a little bit about what is going on in the education sector. I'm having a bit of a challenge with my clicker, which interferes with the flow. Hopefully we'll be able to... I think somebody's also controlling from there. Can we go back? Okay. Maybe I'll just signal to you to move. Okay. So in Ghana, we currently, I don't know if you can see the screen. Maybe I'll go this way so you can see the screen. We currently have a massive concentration on secondary education in particular. You want to change my clicker? Okay. We currently have a massive emphasis on secondary education, and most of you are aware of the free SHS program. In fact, you're all beneficiaries of the free SHS program. Thank you. It's working now. Okay. Oh, I have to, okay. That is a bit counterintuitive. Okay. So, one of the things that you realize is that the emphasis on secondary education, and most of you here will argue that the resources that are available to your school are not enough, and I understand that. But the truth is, on a national scale, most of our resources nowadays, far beyond this proportion in terms of number of students involved, actually go to secondary education. And that is reflected in a number of important statistics. One of them being that the ratio of teachers to students is far lower in secondary than in primary. So the ratio of students to faculty is 1 to 16 thereabouts on average. There will be differences across schools. And in primary school, it's 1 to 27, almost 1 to 30. So that tells you that we employ more teachers in secondary school. It will surprise you to know that even though we have a lot more primary students, we have the same number, nearly the same number of secondary school teachers as we do at the primary level. And there are other statistics, other facts that I can use to make this point that we are heavily concentrated on secondary education. I just don't have enough time. But if you check the proportion of our spending on education that goes to secondary school versus primary school and the rest, you come to the same conclusion. The other point is that we've seen a very significant upsurge in the number of students attending secondary school since the free SHS program, for sure. But if you look at the numbers very carefully, you will see that the numbers peaked immediately it was introduced. It peaked in 2022, a couple of years after it was introduced. And in 2022, we had about 555,000 first year enrollments. Thereafter, it declined significantly in 2023, recovered a little bit, but not to the peak level. So already the free SHS effect is tapering away. So it had an immediate bump, and you might assume that this means that there were people that genuinely would not have gone into secondary school without the program. But once the burden became clearer to parents, and often it's due to the fact that even if the fees are free, for those that will not drop out because the fees are free, they are sacrificing potential to earn income. And that is one factor that most of us have not considered. So what that does mean is that what we now recognizing is the enrollment surge moving back to the historical mean. So if you look at a curve without free SHS, and then in 2022 or 2018, there was a surge, 2022, a plateau, and then it started to drop again. If you drew the line in between, you will see that what has happened is that we are reverting to the mean level of growth. And that's an important point. The second point you also notice is that our spending on education as a share of GDP has actually dropped. So even though we are spending more on education out of our budget, because our budget as a share of GDP is dropping, what does that mean? It means that the government is not able to extract enough resources from the economy. The overall spending on education as a share of our GDP is the entire output of our economic performance in a year, is dropping as well. So that's also very interesting. And then the third piece is that tertiary education is rising, but at its historical mean. So the free SHS has not done much to transform the ability of students to enter into university. The growth rate of university enrollment is literally the same before and after free SHS. So these are important points about the current state of education that we need to pay attention to. But these were all quantitative factors. They were numerical. I was using numbers. And if you've done any education, you are in pre-sec, so you've done a lot of education already, you know that numbers only tell half the story, sometimes even less. So we also have to look at the qualitative aspects of the educational situation. I'm not talking about qualitative purely in terms of the quality of the education, but other factors that cannot be appreciated numerically using numbers alone. And one of those is definitely competency and proficiency. So competency, I'm not going to bore you with the technical definitions that they use in this kind of research, but generally competency means that more or less, you are numerate and you are literate. You can read and write, can do some math. It's reasonable. Proficient means that you're doing pretty well. And if you look at the numbers over the last couple of years, since 2018, we have not seen an appreciable increase in proficiency or competency in Ghana. We are more or less below the 2016 level presently. And this affects both literacy and numeracy. So even though quantitatively we've seen some progress, from the National Education Assessment point of view, the increase in proficiency and competency has not followed suit. And that's an important point to also point out in terms of the current situation in our education system. Some of you will say, okay, is this about, so-called low-class schools in Ghana or tier 3 schools in Ghana or grade C schools in Ghana? Not really. It varies across, true, but that variation is not necessarily between rich or well-to-do schools and poor or not so well-to-do schools. Not necessarily. If you compare Gehe and Achimota, what you are looking at is Wesley Girls High School versus Achimota Secondary School. Achimota College, something like called that way. What you are seeing is that the performance on variation for sure, but that variation is not necessarily just between good schools or so-called top schools and not so top schools. It's really a variation that, to my mind, is systematic across the board, but you have outliers, such as Gehe. So that is another important point to bear in mind. The other point that I've already made in another way is that dropouts are still a big problem. So we introduce free SHS more or less to stop dropouts, but when you look at the numbers, and you look at the number of people that are out of secondary school or the percentage of students that complete secondary education, you can tell that it can go as low as just 20% of children of that age category, that is children that should be in secondary school, only 20% of them in the Volta region are in secondary school, or at least complete secondary school, which is different. So there is a dropout rate that is still quite systematic. And then there's an out-of-school problem that is quite systematic, notwithstanding free SHS and the other dynamics. Okay. And that will obviously reflect in enrollment gaps in terms of looking at the share of students with foundation skills, that's the basic skills to be able to go on and go into employment and things like that. And I've also already talked to you about the out-of-school rates for primary school. No, I've talked to you about secondary school. But in primary school, where we have the lowest problem, or we have the smallest problem, we still do have significant out-of-school problem. What does that mean? It means that the child is at the age where they should be in primary school, but they are not. And you can see that for poor households, 16% of children are still not in school, even though they are at the age where they should be in primary school. So this is also quite important. And then there's a fascinating situation that has evolved. And this being a boys' school, maybe you have sympathy with the phenomenon. And that is that we used to talk a lot about the girl child. The problem now is with the boy child. So what we are seeing is that when it comes to completion rates and enrollment rates for primary, females are doing better than boys. So girls are now 73% completion rates in primary, boys are 69%. And it's the same with enrollment as well. And so what has happened in junior secondary school is similar. So girls are doing better across each level of primary or basic education in Ghana compared to boys. And that's not what you often hear because of the gender affirmative action related matters that is on there. But these are important statistical facts. And then when it comes to alignment with the job market, so you come to school, you get a degree. In this case, you get a certificate. And then you are supposed to go into the workplace environment or continue to further education. But ultimately, you need to get into the workplace. One of the challenges that we've talked about a lot in this country is that we don't seem to have enough students going into the so-called STEM areas, science, technology, engineering, math areas, or the preparatory areas that will lead you into those particular workflows. So you look on the map, on the chart, and you can tell that when they get to university, the majority of our students are in education. A quarter of them are in education. 1/3 of them are in business and law. And then the next biggest segment is social sciences. you can see clearly that agriculture and veterinary, ICT, science and maths, engineering, very small proportions in terms of enrollment. And it's something that everybody knows in Ghana, everybody kind of talks about, that we're not training enough people with hardcore technical skills, who can do things, as opposed to people who maybe research into things, or people that sometimes are involved in our social analysis space, for instance, or other segments. All of them are important. It's just that the proportionality is too skewed away from the technical disciplines, the disciplines where you have to acquire certain competencies that are linked to industrialization and things like that. The wage gaps that then emerge after you leave school is in a way reflective of this. What you are looking on the chart is that small enterprises, which in every economy is the lifeblood of the economy. If you go to Germany, it's small businesses that power Germany's export miracle. The ability of big companies to export worldwide, Mercedes and all of this, is powered by the fact that they depend on a supply chain where the suppliers are small companies. So essentially, if you go to Mercedes and you look at all the suppliers to Mercedes, 80% or more will be companies with 50 people or less, providing different components and different services. The problem here is that in those kinds of companies, and because obviously we are a smaller economy, we are using companies with less than 15 employees, the wage gap, how much you earn if you work for such a company versus if you work for a bigger company, is massive. You earn roughly on average 1/4. If you work for a tiny company or an SME, a small and medium company, you earn 1/4 what somebody who works for a large company earns. That has a productivity effect, because in every country in the world, the kinds of high productivity inputs that go into the big operations come from small companies. The bigger you are, the more inefficient you are. It's almost a law of nature. So if you want really high productivity, that is essentially low cost inputs, you often need them from smaller companies. Of course, there are instances where scale matters, but that is traditionally for complete or finished goods. For inputs and intermediate inputs, you need your small companies to be extremely efficient. And here the problem is that the small companies pay so low and often are in the informal sector, and therefore they are not able to sustain the large enterprises. And this is a very important point to note as well. Anyway, what has the government been trying to do about all the problems that I've been listing? Because all I've been doing here is just listing problem after problem after problem. And the government is, of course, not blind. The government has an alertness or a degree of vigilance about these problems. So what the government has done is that it's introduced the so-called STEM schools. These are model schools, about 7 of them, I think, at last count, which are supposed to provide the highest standard of education in the science, technology, engineering, and math discipline, so other schools like Presec and the rest can follow. I'm not too sure we are following, though. So this is Bosomtwi Girls, which is supposed to set the pace for you guys that think that you're on top of the world. And then there is also the TVT, which is basically technical and vocational educational teaching, or vocational and technical educational institutions. And we know we have some of those at second cycle level or secondary level. But the idea is to have these model schools that would do extraordinarily well and therefore set the pace for the entire educational system. So this is the one for Anyinam. The problem, I think, with all of these intervention is that in a way they are focused on brick and mortar. So the assumption is that if we build these schools and we put them there, they will somehow filter through, or their impact will filter through the rest of the educational ecosystem. And I don't think the theory of change, how exactly that is supposed to happen, has been articulated well. We have faculty in this room, and to be interested in the panel discussion whether they think all of these interventions will make a difference. Because if you're not connecting, then how is Presec going to learn from Bosomtwi Girls? Well, how is that supposed to happen essentially? So that is a very interesting point as well. The other thing that the government is doing is these so-called iBoxes. This is an attempt to bring technology to every corner of the country and to education in every corner of the country. And essentially what they do is they have these boxes that have embedded in them transmission systems. So essentially it's a small area network, so to speak, that allows you to connect to the box without a general internet. So you are able to then to access content. Initially it was only 30,000 resources on each box. But at the current stage, they've managed to put about 6,000 on the boxes. And they're supposed to be distributing them across the rural parts of the country and elsewhere. Then you have iCampus, which is supposed to provide an integrated school management system across the board and enable the best practices to be shared, including curricular best practices across schools. So these are important interventions, and we've raised we've borrowed millions of dollars, and in some cases, we've received that money for free from the likes of DFID, USAID, and the likes to try and power this through. Inquisitive people like me like to go and look at the numbers. We like to go and dig and ask whether or not these penetrations is working. And people have done a lot of research around these interventions. And in respect of iBox and iCampus, the problem is what you see on the right: inadequate proficiency in computer use, certain percentage, poor technical support, inadequate technical training, and a list of challenges that are preventing these responses from having the impact that they could potentially have. And when you look at the implementation of the grant, and I've not, of course, mentioned all the initiatives that the government has to respond to the problems I have identified, but if you look at them, you do conclude by just looking at the numbers, the target numbers and the rest of it, that there is a huge implementation lapse. There's an intent, the government has a policy intent, and then there's the actual capability to deliver on the intent. And that gap keeps widening when you look from year to year. And a very simple example is school inspection. How many times a year are they able to mount a school inspection? And they're supposed to do it every quarter or so. And they're supposed to do it across the country. You look at the target number of schools that they have to inspect, and you look at the actual number of schools that they are able to inspect, it's always a massive gap. And that tells you that capacity to deploy is a major limiting factor. The government's inability to deploy resources to address its own policy intent, to drive forward its own policy. We are all very different. We all learn very differently. I will be very honest with you and tell you that when I was in Presec, I gained more in my extracurricular activities than I did in my curricular activities. What does that mean? The activities outside the classroom stayed with me for longer. I was the XRC president. I was president of the Quiz Writers and Debaters Club, and I was an editorial board. And those skills that I gained in public speaking, in writing, to some extent leadership, stayed with me far longer than anything I learned, because you forget very quickly. That's just the nature of learning. But the experiential aspects of it was very important. Because we are so different, the personalization of education through streaming, through early identification of people with learning needs, through early identification of people with gifts, etc., is critical. Knowing the students and knowing how different they are and trying to tailor the educational experience for them, to my mind, is the most central of all the changes that must happen in education for education to become truly impactful in the world. How are we doing with that in the world? Well, first of all, what has happened over the last 2 decades is that formal education, the part of education that happens in places like Presec, that happens in the universities and the rest, have become what we call embedded. What do I mean by that? They are merely inserted in a broader ecosystem. So how you learn is impacted not just by sitting in a formal classroom and following a specified course. What you get on social media, what you get by reading the newspapers, what you get on TV, what your friends tell you. A lot more education nowadays is circulating around the formal education system, and it's influencing the formal education system. And that's very important to understand. The second thing that is also critical is that we are moving more and more towards what we call problem-based teaching and program-based teaching. And all the universities on whose advisory councils I serve, or in whose different programs I serve, will emphasize the fact that more and more, education is not about learning things in the abstract. It's about being confronted with problems, being walked through those problems, and then that experiential benefit of having walked through the problem and the sense of motivation and achievement that generates is what triggers learning. And to my mind, that ability then to have multidimensional teaching of that nature, where the problem is not one where the answer is clear. You and the teacher goes through an experience of exploring the problem together, and then over time you learn together. And then you still admit that there are things that you can never fully understand, because that's the nature of the real world problems. Real world problems are very different from school problems. In school, you are given a test, Right? You're given a lesson, and then there's a test. In life, you get a test, and then you get a lesson. And that also then means that very often, there is no single answer to a problem. That can be very mind-boggling, because you will get groomed in an institution like Preseg to get to the right answer. And your pride is linked to your ability to get to the right answer. But in politics, in corporate management, in leadership, generally speaking, there are rarely simple answers. Should we have done free SHS in the way we did it all at once so that we would minimize dropouts? Or should we have done it progressively so that we have the infrastructure to match? There is not a single answer. There are different ranges of answers depending on how you approach the problem. And most problems in real life are like that. And education must reflect that. So any education that is about here is the answer and the best person, the person who gets to the answer, is in a way shortchanging you. Because the real world is not like that at all. The other problem is that, or rather the other phenomenon that is gaining ground is education that is active. It's not based on the notion that, you sit there quietly and you download. On top of that, we also have significant changes in the way that the different parts of the curriculum that test the different capabilities and competencies you have relate to each other. And lastly, there's this notion nowadays that has gained ground. It's a European concept, but it's slowly become global. This idea of key competencies. So what that means is you don't come to an educational institution like Presec and just live with knowledge in your head about subjects and disciplines alone. Yes, the subject disciplines are important. If you're going to be a doctor, you better know your biology. But there's a lot about medicine that goes beyond biology. A lot about how you relate to patients. A lot about timing. A lot about judgment, differential diagnosis, where the data can point to multiple diseases. And you have to take the history of the patient and then try and use that to synchronize. And the doctors in this room will tell you that the greatest doctors and surgeons in this world are not the ones who mastered biology necessarily. There are a lot of other skills. The key competencies that are on this board, the 7 key competencies that have become universally accepted, are not necessarily subject matter specific. They are designed so that you can learn across disciplines. So you have some like communicating in a foreign language, communicating your mother tongue, cultural expression and awareness, mathematical thinking, digital competence. These are not subject matter capacities alone. They require you to think beyond subject matter capacity. But I want to emphasize in this short talk the issue of key competence 7. So I mentioned 7 key competencies. This key competence 7 is in respect of initiative and entrepreneurship. The simple answer is the ability to take the first step forward where there is a problem, identify a potential solution, and move towards attempting to implement a solution. And this doesn't mean you have to set up a business. There's a lot of thinking around entrepreneurship which is about setting up a business, which is just plain wrong. If you're in the civil service, if you're in a corporation, if you're in Presec, if you're in a class, do you have the ability to spot problems? That's number 1. And do you have the tendency to want to do something about the problems? And do you have the savvy to start small and grow and learn and do your best and adjust and adapt? Because that skill to me is the number 1 future-proofing skill. The skill that will take you forward in the future and make you truly effective, whether as a leader, as an employee, or something else. This ability to spot that something is off, this ability to take a first step to try and fix it somehow. Of course, you can narrow that to your own specific setting, but key competence 7 around initiative and entrepreneurship are identified by educational psychologists around the world as critical. Reasoning mathematically by default. I know this is going to be hard because if you look at our proficiency scores in Ghana, our numeracy is a bigger problem than our literacy. In fact, only 10% of students tested on the National Education Assessment are proficient in mathematical thinking. It's a huge problem. And because mathematics is taught in the nature of formulas, a lot of us have been underserved because mathematics is not about formulas. It's a way of seeing the world. It's a way of simplifying complexity, as I have done with our education system by giving you a series of key numbers that gives you a quicker perspective. So mathematical thinking is not about knowing the formulas and being able to do, as we call in business, chew the elective math textbook. It's really about seeing the world through order and then trying to find where that order comes from and the interrelations among the components that you are observing that creates the order. That's mathematical thinking. And you can be someone that doesn't do well in classroom mathematics, but really thinks mathematically because you think algorithmically. You know how to sequence a problem into steps and say, okay, this will go first and this will follow this. But this is the interplay between the steps. That kind of thinking is extremely critical for future-proof learning. Future-proof learning means learning that carries forward into the future effectively. There is this famous scientist called John Newman, and he makes this profound statement that the reason why a lot of people think mathematics is difficult is because they don't realize how complex the world is. Mathematics is actually a way to make the world simple. The world is extremely complex. The only way you're able to organize the world in ways that allow you to manage that complexity is through mathematical thinking. So mathematics is actually to make things simple. And I think that's important. The other reason why, to my mind, mathematics is critical comes from another distinguished thinker who has argued that, who has argued that mathematics is primarily the only reality because real reality cannot be confronted. If you think of, in my early days, wanted to be an astrophysicist. So I spent time trying to understand the cosmos. And in those days, the only thing that stared at me every time that I looked at any particular physics equation, tried to compare it with a gamma ray telescope feed, etc., was just sheer incomprehension. I mean, the vastness of space and all of these really complex matter. The math is how you begin to slowly peel away that complexity and make headway. It's a lamp that gives you guidance. And therefore, future thinking will be heavily based on your ability to think mathematically. I'm wrapping up now on educational psychology techniques and how they interplay with technology. There is something that those of you that really like to learn on your own, who have developed this sense of self-initiative and like to explore, you should check out something called Bloom's taxonomy. Every educational psychologist is familiar with this, but this is not a meeting of educational psychologists. And Bloom's taxonomy talks about how you acquire mastery in education, how you become a master in any discipline, any subject. You start off basically with trying to remember, which is retention. And then you are supposed to move through understanding, application, analysis, evaluation, and to start to create. Invariably, your ability to move up the pyramid in Bloom's taxonomy is what shows that you are having a truly comprehensive education. Your ability to stop just simply remembering things and start to think, how do I apply this? How does this change my previous perception? And then to move to the point where you want to create your own. You want to challenge the theory. You want to say, but I don't think my experience syncs with this completely. So this other aspect of it, I must myself engender. That is the height of education. The question is, what can technology do about it? I'll come to that in a moment. The second other thing I want you to go and do some additional learning about in your own spare time is the so-called multiplicity of intelligence or multiple intelligences. What that means is that there isn't one type of intelligence. If you go to school in a traditional setting, you can easily be confused into thinking that knowledge and intelligence is one form. So a lot of people think, for instance, that linguistic dexterity, mathematical capability, that's what we call intelligence. Actually, what educational psychologists have discovered is that intelligence is in many, many forms. There are some people that are very good with spatial dynamics. There are people that are very good with musical and acting abilities and things like that. And you ask yourself, if indeed your brain was superior to them, how come you can't sing like them? How come you can't sing like Shatawale? Yes, your brain is superior to Shatawale because you are in science school and you're going to become one of the best doctors in Ghana. Good. But you can't sing like Shatawale. And it's the same brain that delivers Shatawale's talent. So that should tell you already that the intelligence quotient as a single number is flawed. There must be multiple ways in which the brain expresses its fertility, its power. If you combine the two things that I've described, the idea that you start off with just simply trying to remember, etc., and then you move to creation, with the idea that there are multiple forms of creation, you learn that one of the fascinating things that the new range in technology is allowing us to do is to see that in real time. What do I mean? Nowadays, if you take any of the LLMs, the large language models, based on which we have things like ChatGPT and the AI tools that are more familiar. Those are not the only range of AI tools, by the way. There are a lot of AI fields. But the one that most people know is what we call large language models, the likes of ChatGPT and the rest. What you see immediately is that you can master a particular way of interacting with the technology that requires, therefore, that the technology itself teaches you what you want to do, if you are good at the prompting. And then the technology also delivers what you want it to achieve. What it is doing is trying to disabuse your mind of the notion that retention is what has value. Because it's on-demand intelligence. So basically, anyone with access to ChatGPT is smarter than you are. That's a very daunting thought. Because the computer outperforms you in retention. It outperforms you in recall. It therefore clearly means that because recall and retention is not the sum of intelligence, you need to think about intelligence in a much more creative sense. Because you cannot match the computer. So you start now to think about what makes me uniquely human. What is it about me and the way I study and the way I learn and the things that excite me? That means, therefore, that when I'm interacting with this technology, I'm introducing something of value. So we go back then to Bloom's taxonomy and we go to the create level. And you realize immediately that the create level is indeed the height of learning. But then we also go back to the multiple intelligence relevant and you realize, okay, there are things the computer can't do too well. Even to date, they cannot express abstract diagrams that are metaphorical. If I ask ChatGPT to generate an image of how excited pre-seconds are, and I want him to generate them in only cubics, it can't do it. It doesn't have our appreciation for poetry, our appreciation for intuitive reasoning, our ability to sympathize with each other, empathic connections. Certain things about us are so human that as the computers get so better at the lower levels of Bloom taxonomy, our ability to create, our ability to transform, our ability to connect with each other, to excite each other, to make other people want to do things, that is what is going to count as intelligence. And in that way, we will even though there are multiplicity of intelligence types, that will be the functional unity of intelligence. And that is the world in which we're moving. And in that world, the truth of the matter is that we have something called micro-learning, which is based on this idea of consistently finding small bits of insight that connects you with new forms of knowledge. In my experience, looking at the Ghana situation, what I have discovered is that the micro-learning opportunities are not linked to specific technologies. A lot of us are using generalized technologies like YouTube, Facebook, and the like. And when you look at specific EdTech downloads, it does not reflect the specialized use of technology to achieve this. What does that mean? What that means is that this micro-learning revolution that is now with us is not necessarily tech-driven per se, because people are not going out there looking for specialized educational technologies. Very few of us in this room do that. But we are becoming used to a new psychological framework. There's a new way our minds expect information to be delivered and learning to be acquired. So you are constantly on the lookout when you're on social media or on the internet to acquire new bits of knowledge. Those new bits of knowledge leads to a very fascinating situation. And that is that the consolidation of long-term memory is changing. You are constantly being refreshed. The same thing that you thought you knew years ago, you see something that sparks another train of thought, similar but different. And it's transforming our ability to use our memory. So the old style where there were fixed answers and you just need to store all of them in your brain and then regurgitate them when you are asked is no longer fashionable. What is fashionable now is that the same insight comes to you in different formats, in different places, even as you live your life, particularly those of you that serve the internet. And this is going to transform the way we learn. The other thing that's definitely also going to be transformed is moving towards specialized qualifications, away from blanket qualifications. So your ability to master a particular talent that is useful, a particular skill that is useful, there will be micro qualifications that enable that. And then when a couple of years later they are not that relevant, you acquire a new set of micro qualifications. So the idea that I go to Harvard or I go to Cambridge, I go to Presec, I go to Legon, and then I get a certificate that lasts me for life and everybody respects me, I think it's in the past. Lastly, we go into the national policy making matrix, which is that, okay, so what can we do about this as a country? One way, I'm trying to move backwards a little bit. One way to do it is simply for countries to become very good at analyzing how their educational infrastructure is set up, their regulation versus their ability to be more globally focused or locally focused, etc., and then to put that in a matrix. And when you do that, you come to this very fascinating conclusion around the way in which educational policy making must be positioned. So in this analysis leads to the next screen, which then you can see that there are different countries and different disciplines. I'm trying to go back. So you can see that there are different areas, highly specialized areas like healthcare, defense, finance, etc. And the different countries have specific capabilities in each of those areas in different ways. But that kind of analysis allows you to position your educational system as a whole in comparison with others and to determine where you will have competitive advantage. And I think if you're in a school like Preseg, it would be helpful if there was national policy of that nature that then ensures that some of you become world-class in your fields. And I think that kind of future thinking is a matter of strategy in national policy making. Lastly, tech in the classroom is a fascinating phenomenon in the sense that there is now enough research that establishes students as very often more familiar with the technology than their teachers. That introduces a completely new ball game. Because if the students that are supposed to be taught are much more familiar and confident and much more aligned with the technological trends, then the nature and the role of teaching must change. First, we must be more willing to accept that we live in a world where there will be machine assistants, and then we have to craft our curriculum to represent that. So you basically set problems that you need a computer to help you with. You need AI to help you with. Because that's the way of the future. So you design the problem set in such a manner that AI used is actually one competency, as opposed to fighting AI on grounds of plagiarism, that people will copy and they will not think. No, you set the problem in such a manner that the AI use itself is required, because certain things require massive computational power that human beings don't have. And how you think about how you do that and you consider the machine an assistant is going to be a huge part of AI in education policy making going forward. And then in that regard, the nature of teaching will change. The teacher will no longer be the person who is the expert, who is supposed to walk you through step by step the path of mastery. The teacher is going to be a guide. The teacher is going to be someone that helps you take risks. The teacher is going to be a visionary, a leader, a role model, someone that excites you and motivates you. But this idea that the teacher's role is to be the one who knows everything about the subject and then slowly walks you through so that you attain the same degree of mastery in a few years down the line will no longer be viable, because everything that I've taught you, I've told you today. Thank you very, very much.
We can do better. Let's give another clap. When I look at your faces, I want to ask whether you are finished, whether you are complete, whether you are completely finished or finished completely. We've heard a lot. Have we done the summaries? We've heard about Bloom's taxonomy. We've heard about 7 things you must consider to be an entrepreneur. We are now hearing that AI must be part of the learning process. Hello? Did you hear the wage gap? Did you hear the wage gap? And the type of companies and what you might be earning? Did you hear that now you would be the person who will have the technical skills, computerized skills, but then you need to be guided? Let's give him another applause, please. Yeah. We could do this and do this the whole day, but we're going to add another speaker. And without much ado, I'm going to invite another person here who is a musical enthusiast, an educationist with a private practice focusing on developing early appreciation for classical music. The love for the piano in the early years propelled him to pursue the ABRSM program to the deep ABRSM level in performance. The pursuit of academic excellence would not be sacrificed as he went on to attain a BSc Electrical Engineering from the KNUST. A pioneering member of the Network Operating Center in KNUST, which saw the development of the first fiber optic infrastructure on KNUST campus, offered all the knowledge in networking and hardworking management. he took up a software and product development role in Ranchard Solutions, working with cutting-edge Java beans and enterprise architecture concepts. Both technology roles in the aforementioned organizations propelled him to an exciting transaction banking in EcoBank. The EcoBank years provided him with the opportunity to join team who developed the transaction banking platform, which serves over 36 African countries and is a significant revenue addition to the bank. Over the last 10 years, he has been working with underprivileged children and private students, building orchestral performance capabilities under the Genius High Foundation, which he co-founded. This effort enabled the creation of the Accra Youth Symphonet, which was a joint effort with so many enthusiasts and brilliant performers from Kinder Paradise Children, Home Lincoln Community School, and several students within the classical music community in Accra. He is presently working with the children in the SOS CV program, developing stringing ensembles capabilities. The goal is to achieve a grade 5 performance level in all the children in the program by 2025. Without much ado, let's please welcome our next speaker, Julius Richardson.
Hello, everyone. Goka forgot to mention that I used to be the assistant school prefect as well in our year 96. Presec is a very dear place to the 96-year group, and when we were putting this together, the president asked me to share my thoughts because he knew I'd taken a different path with my own children as far as education was concerned. So he was like, Julius, why don't you share those experiences? I think Bright has done more than enough justice to this particular subject of education and what it will mean in the future. And so, if my slides are ready, I took this from a perspective of trying to understand what education really means, at least to me. There are all these different definitions, and I think one of the first is the economic value of education. So before I could answer that question for myself, I simply said, I think we go to school so that we can acquire the skills and develop our talents to a point where we can actually come out into a world of work. All right, so I don't know, are my slides? Great, let's go, yeah. So stay on this page for a while. We took a drone and took a picture of Presec. I like doing that because it gives us an idea of what the true potential is. And I know that the middle section has kind of covered your view, but if you can, you see all that side of Presec, the farm area, is literally more than twice or almost 2/3 the size of the campus that we're living